The cruelest traps are the ones disguised as invitations. When Naomi Brooks saw the reunion invitation in her mailbox, she almost threw it away. 20 years had passed since high school, and nearly 5 years had passed since her divorce from Jason Walker. So many memories faded with time. Others simply learned how to hide. The envelope was thick, expensive, and stamped with gold lettering. Inside was an invitation to the Riverside Grand Hotel, one of the most prestigious venues in the city. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary class reunion. But Naomi knew Jason too well. Hassan had always loved an audience. He loved winning even more. Across town, Jason stood inside the ballroom days before the event, watching staff arrange crystal centerpieces beneath glowing chandeliers. A satisfied smile crossed his face as he reviewed the guest list. When his eyes landed on Naomi's name, he paused. Then he picked up his phone and made a call. "Make sure she gets a front row table," he said casually. "Right near the stage." The person on the other end agreed without asking questions. Hassan ended the call and slipped his phone into his pocket. To everyone else, it was just seating. To him, it was preparation. The reunion night arrived beneath a sky painted with streaks of orange and deep blue. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway outside the hotel. Former classmates stepped onto the red carpet entrance laughing, hiking, and comparing accomplishments. Inside, giant screens displayed photos from decades ago while soft music drifted through the ballroom. At the center of the room stood a round table with one unusual detail. One chair remained empty. No name card. No explanation. Used an empty seat facing the stage. Guests noticed it immediately. They whispered about it between conversations, wondering who it belonged to. Hassan heard the speculation and said nothing. He simply smiled and raised his glass. Meanwhile, Naomi sat alone in her apartment, staring at the invitation resting beside a cup of untouched coffee. Outside her window, city lights flickered across the evening skyline. Her phone buzzed once. A message appeared on the screen. She read it, and for the first time that day, a faint smile touched her face. Then she stood, smoothed the sleeve of her elegant navy dress, and reached for her purse. Across the city, the ballroom continued filling with guests. Laughter grew louder. Hassan glanced toward the entrance every few minutes. He looked confident. Almost excited. As if tonight would finally prove something he had wanted people to believe for years. What nobody in that room understood was that the empty chair was about to become the most important seat in the entire building. People rarely remember who helped build the success story. They only remember who stands on the stage. The ballroom buzzed with conversation as former classmates drifted between tables holding sparkling glasses and carefully polished memories. Laughter rose beneath the chandeliers. Old photographs flashed across giant screens. Every few minutes another guest walked through the entrance and was greeted by cheers. Hassan Walker seemed to be everywhere at once. He shook hands, told stories, and accepted compliments as if the evening had been organized for him alone. The expensive watch on his wrist caught the light whenever he lifted his glass. Around him, people nodded with admiration. Many of them had followed his career online. They knew the business awards, the interviews, the carefully curated success. Few of them remembered the years before any of that existed. Hassan enjoyed that fact. Near the back of the room, a group of former classmates gathered around one of the screens displaying photographs from high school. A younger Jason appeared in one image wearing a football jersey. Beside him stood Naomi Brooks, smiling beneath the Friday night stadium lights. The image remained on the screen for only a few seconds before another photograph replaced it. Most people barely noticed. Hassan noticed immediately. His smile tightened. Then he looked away. There had been a time when Naomi knew every version of him. The ambitious dreamer. The struggling salesman. The young man who talked about success long before success arrived. Back then, she had worked long shifts while Jason built connections and chased opportunities. She had listened to endless business ideas over late dinners. She had encouraged him through disappointments nobody else saw. For years, they moved forward together. But success has a way of changing the people who believe they earned it alone. As Jason's career grew, the distance between them grew with it. Invitations arrived. New social circles appeared. Conversations became shorter. Priorities shifted. One day Naomi realized she was no longer standing beside him. She was standing behind him. Then eventually, she was standing nowhere in his future plans at all. Across the ballroom, Jason paused beside the stage and glanced again toward the entrance. The empty chair remained untouched. Guests continued whispering about it. Some assumed it belonged to a celebrity alumnus. Others guessed a surprise guest would arrive later. Hassan never corrected them. The mystery served his purpose. At that moment, one of his friends approached carrying a drink. "Do you think Naomi is actually coming?" the man asked. Hassan smirked. "Oh, she is coming." There was confidence in his voice. The kind of confidence that comes from believing the evening will unfold exactly as planned. He looked once more toward the ballroom doors. Somewhere beyond those walls, Naomi was making her way across the city. And for the first time all night, the man who seemed completely in control checked the time twice. The people who think they know your story are usually the ones who stop paying attention halfway through. The ballroom doors opened, and for a brief moment, the conversations nearest the entrance softened. Naomi Brooks stepped inside with calm, measured confidence. She was not wearing anything flashy. No diamonds large enough to attract attention. No designer logo meant to impress strangers. Used a beautifully tailored navy dress and the quiet presence of someone who no longer needed approval to feel complete. Several heads turned. Some people recognized her immediately. Others needed a second look. 20 years had changed everyone. Yet there was something about Naomi that felt surprisingly unchanged. Not her appearance. Not her age. Her composure. Why many people entered the reunion eager to prove something, Naomi seemed completely free from that burden. She handed her invitation to a staff member and followed the directions toward the ballroom floor. Across the room, Jason spotted her almost instantly. His smile widened. He set down his drink and straightened his jacket. This was the moment he had been waiting for. Nearby guests began whispering as Naomi crossed the room. Some remembered the divorce. Others remembered the social media posts that followed. The carefully edited photographs. The public image of Jason moving forward while Naomi seemed to disappear from public view. People naturally filled missing information with assumptions. Most of them assumed they already knew how the story ended. Naomi reached her assigned table and immediately noticed the empty chair beside her. She glanced at it for only a second before taking her seat. The chair remained vacant. The mystery remained unsolved. Hassan approached with the confidence of a man stepping onto a stage. "Naomi," he said warmly enough for nearby guests to hear. "I am glad you made it." Naomi looked up and offered a polite smile. "Thank you." The simplicity of her response caught him slightly off guard. He had expected tension. Awkwardness. Maybe even resentment. Instead, she seemed perfectly comfortable. Hassan pulled out a nearby chair and sat down across from her. "How have you been?" he asked. "Good," Naomi replied. "Life has been good." Again, nothing more. No explanations. No attempts to impress. No signs of struggle either. The answer irritated him more than he expected. Around them, classmates continued watching discreetly. Everyone sensed an invisible history sitting at the table. Hassan leaned back and smiled. "I heard you have been keeping a pretty low profile." Naomi folded her hands gently in her lap. Sometimes peace is more valuable than attention. A few nearby guests exchanged glances. The response was calm, but it landed with unexpected weight. Hassan laughed lightly and changed the subject. Yet something about the interaction felt different from what he imagined. Naomi was not playing the role he had assigned her years ago as the evening continued, the empty chair beside her remained untouched. More guests noticed it now. More questions circulated through the room. Even Jason found himself glancing toward it from time to time. Then, just as the reunion host stepped onto the stage to begin the night's program, Naomi's phone vibrated once against the table. She looked down at the screen. Read the message. And for the second time that evening, a quiet smile appeared on her face. The strongest people are not the ones who never break. They are the ones who quietly rebuild after nobody stays to watch. Naomi lowered her phone and slipped it back into her purse. The message was short. Safe travels. Running a little behind. See you soon. There was no signature. There did not need to be one. Her smile faded into the same calm expression she had worn all evening. Around here, the reunion continued moving forward. The host welcomed everyone to the stage. Applause filled the ballroom. Yet for a moment, Naomi's thoughts drifted far away from the hotel and back to a different chapter of her life. There had been a time when silence felt heavy. After the divorce, the apartment seemed larger than it really was. Every room echoed with absence. Friends chose sides. Invitations stopped arriving. Social media became a place where strangers celebrated a version of events they barely understood. During those first months, Naomi discovered something painful. People are often more interested in visible victories than in visible resilience. Hasson's life appeared to accelerate. New business deals. New photographs. New attention. Meanwhile, Naomi disappeared from public view. At least that was what everyone assumed. What nobody saw were the early mornings. The fresh notebooks filled with plans. The small coffee shop where she spent hours rebuilding her confidence one day at a time. They did not see her volunteering at community programs. They did not see the certifications she completed. The classes she attended. The book stacked beside her bed. The evening spent creating a life that belonged entirely to her. Healing did not happen all at once. It happened in ordinary moments. A peaceful walk before sunrise. A meal enjoyed alone without sadness. The first day. She laughed without remembering the past. The first week she stopped checking whether anyone noticed her progress. Eventually, something changed. She stopped measuring her worth through other people's opinions. She stopped trying to prove she had survived. Survival was no longer the goal. Living became the goal. One Saturday morning, nearly 3 years after the divorce, Naomi found herself sitting alone in a neighborhood bookstore cafe. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The smell of coffee filled the air. She had a book open in front of her when a stranger approached carrying 2 cups. "I think they accidentally made an extra latte," he said. "Would you mind helping me solve that problem?" Naomi looked up and laughed. The man introduced himself as Alexander Reed. There was nothing dramatic about the moment. No grand entrance. No immediate spark that belonged in a movie. Used kindness. Conversation. Ease. What she did not know that day was that Alexander possessed something far more valuable than wealth. He listened. Truly listened. While other people were impressed by appearances, Alexander seemed interested in character. Weeks turned into months. Friendship became trust. Trust became something deeper. And through all of it, Alexander never asked Naomi to become anyone other than herself. Back inside the ballroom, applause erupted as another speaker finished a presentation. Naomi returned to the present. Across the room, Jason was laughing with a group of classmates. He looked completely certain of how the evening would unfold. But certainty can be dangerous when it is built on outdated assumptions. And tonight, almost everyone in that room was about to discover just how much Naomi's life had changed. Some of the biggest secrets stay hidden because nobody thinks to ask the right question. The reunion host continued moving through the evening's program while waiters carried trays of drinks between tables. Laughter rose and fell across the ballroom like waves. Yet the attention of many guests kept drifting back toward Naomi's table. More specifically, toward the empty chair beside her. The longer it remained vacant, the more people talked about it. A few classmates eventually joined Naomi's table. They exchanged stories about old teachers, forgotten school dances, and careers that had taken unexpected turns. Naomi participated politely, but she never volunteered much information about her personal life. The less she revealed, the more curious people became. One woman leaned forward with a friendly smile. "So tell us, Naomi. What have you been up to all these years?" Naomi took a sip of water before answering. "Building a life I enjoy." The answer was sincere. It was also frustratingly incomplete. Several people laughed. "That sounds mysterious," someone joked. Naomi smiled but offered nothing else. Across the room, Jason watched the exchange carefully. He had expected Naomi to arrive carrying visible signs of disappointment. Instead, she seemed unusually content. Not excited. Not nervous. Simply content. It was becoming increasingly difficult to fit her into the narrative he had rehearsed in his mind. As conversations continued, Naomi's thoughts briefly returned to the years after she met Alexander Reed. Their relationship had developed slowly. Neither of them rushed anything. There were no dramatic declarations. No attempts to impress one another. The foundation was built on something much quieter. Trust. Alexander never talked about status. He never introduced himself using accomplishments. In fact, during the first several months of their friendship, Naomi had no idea how successful he actually was. She only knew he was thoughtful, patient, and remarkably attentive. One afternoon they spent nearly 3 hours walking through a botanical garden discussing books, family traditions, and places they hoped to visit someday. Another weekend they volunteered together at a local literacy program. Alexander seemed equally comfortable speaking with executives or helping children organize bookshelves. The consistency impressed her more than any achievement ever could. It was not until much later that Naomi accidentally learned the truth. She had been waiting for him at a restaurant when a financial news segment appeared on a television mounted above the bar. The screen displayed Alexander's face alongside a headline discussing one of the largest technology acquisitions of the year. Naomi stared at the television, then at the man who walked through the restaurant entrance a few minutes later carrying the same relaxed smile she had always known. When she asked why he never mentioned any of it, Alexander simply shrugged. "Because it is not the most important thing about me." That answer told her everything she needed to know. Back in the ballroom, another message appeared on Naomi's phone. This time she did not open it immediately. She already knew what it would say. Meanwhile, Jason stood near the stage speaking with several former classmates. One of them pointed casually toward the empty chair. "Do you know who is supposed to sit there?" Hassan looked over. For the briefest moment, uncertainty crossed his face. Then he forced a smile. "No idea," he replied. But for the first time all evening, he was no longer completely sure that was true. Arrogance becomes dangerous the moment it mistakes silence for weakness. The evening moved deeper into the night as dinner plates were cleared and the reunion shifted into its most anticipated portion. The host invited selected alumni to share stories about where life had taken them after graduation. One by one, former classmates stepped onto the stage. Some spoke about families. Others spoke about careers. The atmosphere grew warm and nostalgic. Yet beneath the pleasant surface, Jason's attention remained fixed on a single objective. Every few minutes he glanced toward Naomi's table. More specifically, toward the empty chair that remained beside her. It was still vacant. Nearly 2 hours had passed since guests first arrived. Whoever was supposed to occupy that seat had not appeared. Slowly, Jason began feeling more confident again. Maybe the mysterious guest was never coming. Maybe Naomi had simply created the illusion of anticipation. The possibility pleased him. Across the ballroom, Naomi remained remarkably calm. She laughed politely at stories. She applauded other speakers. She seemed entirely unaffected by the growing curiosity surrounding her table. Her composure only encouraged more speculation. Eventually, the host stepped back onto the stage and smiled toward the audience. "Before we wrap up tonight," he announced, "I would love to hear from a few more classmates." Several people applauded. Then someone near the front jokingly called Jason's name. The room responded immediately. Jason was popular, confident, successful. He practically lived for moments like this. The applause grew louder until he finally stood and adjusted his jacket. As he walked toward the stage, a wave of attention followed him. He accepted the microphone with practiced ease. "Thank you," he said with a smile. "It is amazing seeing everyone again after all these years." More applause followed. Jason began sharing stories from high school. The audience laughed at the appropriate moments. He spoke about ambition, about opportunities, about how life sometimes surprises people. Then his eyes drifted toward Naomi. The shift was subtle enough that most people did not immediately notice. "One thing life has taught me," Jason continued, "is that not everyone handles change the same way." A few guests exchanged curious glances. Jason smiled. Some people move forward. Some people stay stuck in the past. The room grew slightly quieter. Naomi looked toward the stage but said nothing. Jason continued. "Success requires difficult decisions. Sometimes you outgrow situations. Sometimes you outgrow people." A handful of nervous laughs floated through the ballroom. Now everyone understood exactly where the conversation was heading. Jason maintained his smile. He never mentioned Naomi by name. He did not need to. The implication was obvious. Several guests looked toward her table, waiting for a reaction, waiting for discomfort, waiting for something. Naomi simply folded her hands together and remained composed. No anger. No embarrassment. No attempt to defend herself. Her silence unsettled Jason more than he expected. He had imagined this moment many times. In every version, she reacted. Tonight she refused to participate. The microphone suddenly felt heavier in his hand. Meanwhile, outside the Riverside Grand Hotel, a black luxury sedan turned into the circular driveway. The headlights swept across the entrance. A valet stepped forward. The vehicle came to a smooth stop beneath the lights. And for the first time that evening, the empty chair inside the ballroom was no longer waiting. The moment someone believes they have already won is often the moment they stop paying attention. Jason remained on stage, holding the microphone with the confidence of a man who thought the room belonged to him. The audience watched attentively. Some looked uncomfortable. Others seemed entertained. Nobody interrupted him. Encouraged by the silence, he continued. "Life has a funny way of rewarding people who are willing to take risks," he said. "Sometimes staying comfortable keeps people exactly where they are." A few guests nodded politely. Jason smiled and glanced once more toward Naomi's table. "I suppose we all know people who never quite reached their potential." The words floated through the ballroom like a challenge disguised as a joke. Several heads turned toward Naomi. She felt their attention settle on her. Yet her expression never changed. She simply sat in her chair with quiet dignity, her hands resting calmly on the table. The empty seat beside her remained untouched. Jason expected embarrassment. He expected discomfort. Instead, he saw something that irritated him far more. Peace. The host standing near the stage shifted awkwardly. Even he seemed to sense that the speech had moved beyond nostalgia and into something more personal. Still, Jason pressed forward. "But that is the great thing about reunions," he continued. "They remind us how far we have come." This time the applause was weaker. Less certain. Across the ballroom, Naomi glanced briefly toward the entrance doors. The movement was subtle enough that most people never noticed. Hassan noticed. He followed her gaze for a moment before looking back at the audience. Whatever confidence had slipped away earlier was returning. The chair was still empty. The evening was nearly over. He believed time was now on his side. Meanwhile, outside the hotel, the black sedan had already come to a stop beneath the covered entrance. A valet opened the rear door. The man who stepped out did not rush. He moved with the calm assurance of someone completely comfortable in any environment. The hotel staff immediately recognized him. Their posture changed almost instantly. Greetings became more formal. One manager appeared from inside the lobby and personally welcomed him. None of this was visible from inside the ballroom. Not yet. Back at the reunion, conversations resumed after Jason's speech. Music returned. Guests stood from their tables and mingled around the room. Yet the tension remained. Everyone could feel that something unresolved still lingered beneath the surface. Hassan stepped down from the stage and made his way directly toward Naomi. "You are awfully quiet tonight," he said with a smile that felt carefully practiced. Naomi looked up at him. "I am listening." "To what?" Hassan asked. Heiress briefly drifted toward the ballroom entrance once again. "To people revealing who they are." The answer landed softly. But it landed. Hassan laughed as though he found it amusing. Inside, however, a flicker of irritation returned. Before he could respond, movement near the entrance began drawing attention from nearby guests. One person turned around. Then another. Conversations started fading. Heads slowly shifted toward the doors. Hassan noticed the change and frowned slightly. The ballroom that had been focused entirely on him moments earlier was now looking somewhere else. And for the first time all evening, Naomi's eyes held the smallest hint of anticipation. True power rarely announces itself. It simply arrives, and the room changes. The conversations nearest the ballroom entrance faded first. Then the silence spread outward table by table until nearly everyone was looking in the same direction. Hassan turned toward the doors with mild annoyance, expecting some ordinary interruption. Instead, he saw a man step into the room with calm, unhurried confidence. The hotel manager walked several steps behind him. Two members of the event staff immediately moved aside to clear a path. A few guests near the entrance visibly froze. One woman placed her hand over her mouth. Another guest quickly reached for his phone as if he needed to confirm what he was seeing. Hassan frowned. The reaction made no sense. Then, recognition began spreading across the ballroom. Not through excitement. Through disbelief. "Is that really him?" someone whispered. "No way. That cannot be. It is him." The words traveled from table to table. Naomi remained seated. Her expression never changed. She simply watched the man approach. Alexander Reed moved through the ballroom without acknowledging the growing attention around him. He seemed completely unaffected by it. People stepped aside instinctively. Some offered greetings. Others stared. Alexander responded with a polite nod but never slowed his pace. Across the room, Jason suddenly felt a knot form in his stomach. He knew that face. Everyone knew that face. Financial magazines. Business interviews. Industry conferences. The founder of one of the largest technology companies in the country. A billionaire whose name regularly appeared alongside some of the most influential business leaders in America. Hassan looked from Alexander to Naomi. Then back again. The possibility forming in his mind felt ridiculous. Impossible. Yet Alexander continued walking directly toward Naomi's table. Every step made the room quieter. The empty chair that had fueled hours of speculation suddenly made perfect sense. When Alexander finally reached the table, he stopped beside Naomi and smiled. Not a public smile. Not the polished smile used for cameras. A genuine one. The kind reserved for someone important. Naomi stood. Alexander leaned down slightly and kissed her hand. The gesture was simple. Respectful. Familiar. The entire ballroom watched in stunned silence. Then Alexander gently pulled out the empty chair and took his seat beside her. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Hassan stood frozen only a few yards away. His confidence had disappeared so quickly it felt unreal. One of the former classmates finally broke the silence. Wait, she said softly. You two know each other? Alexander looked at Naomi first before answering. Of course. Another pause followed. Then he added the words that instantly changed the atmosphere in the room. Naomi is my wife. The sentence landed with the force of a revelation nobody saw coming. Gasps echoed across nearby tables. Faces turned toward Jason. Thou Naomi. Back toward Alexander. Suddenly dozens of disconnected details snapped into place. The empty chair. The private messages. Naomi's calm confidence. Her complete lack of reaction throughout the evening. None of it had been uncertainty. It had been certainty. Hassan felt every eye in the room shift away from him. For the first time all night, he was no longer the center of attention. And for the first time all night, Naomi did not need to say a single word. The most satisfying victories are the ones that do not require an explanation. For several long seconds, nobody in the ballroom seemed to know what to say. Conversations disappeared. Glasses remained suspended halfway to lips. Even the music felt distant beneath the weight of the moment. Alexander sat comfortably beside Naomi as if nothing extraordinary had happened. To him, perhaps nothing had. It was not trying to impress anyone. It was simply sitting beside the woman he loved. Yet the effect on the room was impossible to ignore. The same guests who had spent the evening making assumptions now looked at Naomi with entirely different eyes. Not because she was connected to wealth. Not because of Alexander's reputation. But because they suddenly realized how little they actually knew about her story. Across the room, Jason stood motionless. Hours earlier, he had expected to control the narrative. He had expected sympathy, admiration, and validation. Instead, every careless assumption he had made was quietly unraveling in front of him. No confrontation had exposed him. No argument had defeated him. Reality had done all the work. One classmate finally approached the table and congratulated Alexander and Naomi on their marriage. Then another followed. Soon a small group gathered around them. Questions filled the air. How long had they been married? How did they meet? Why had nobody known? Naomi answered politely, but briefly. She never exaggerated. Never bragged. Never used the opportunity to make anyone feel small. The contrast spoke louder than any speech ever could. As the evening wound down, guests began collecting coats and saying their goodbyes. The reunion that had started with judgment now ended with reflection. People remembered every comment Jason had made earlier. They remembered Naomi's silence. They remembered who had spent the evening seeking attention and who had never needed it. Eventually Alexander stood and offered his hand. Naomi smiled and slipped her hand into his. Ready to go home? He asked softly. More than ready, she replied. Together they walked toward the ballroom exit. Neither of them looked back. They did not need to. Being them, conversations immediately resumed. But now the topic was different. The story everyone would remember from the reunion was not Jason's success. It was Naomi's grace. Outside, the cool night air greeted them as they stepped beneath the hotel lights. The black sedan waited nearby. Alexander opened the door for her, and Naomi paused for a moment before getting inside. She glanced back toward the glowing windows of the ballroom one final time. Not with anger. Not with regret. Simply with peace. The chapter that once hurt her no longer had power over her. She slid into the car, and the door closed gently behind her. Moments later, the sedan disappeared into the city lights. Back inside the ballroom, Jason remained standing alone beside a table crowded with empty glasses. For the first time that night, he understood something he should have learned years ago. Naomi had never come back to prove her worth. She had come back already knowing it. And that was why she won.